Well, I tweeted the other day that I had decided to leave the service of the NHS. I'm moving on. I'm going totally private, and a number of people have asked me why. Now, this is a rather difficult video for me to make in many ways because my wife is ex-NHS. A whole lot of my friends are either radiographers, nurses, surgeons, GPs, across the gamut over the years, both serving and retired of various ages, and they're all dedicated professionals, and they're all fairly dedicated to the concept of the national health. Well, I've written about the national health, and you'll find the information that I have on it there, and you can make your own judgment. I personally don't think the national health is fit for purpose. It was inaugurated in 1947, 1948, and like 1947, 1948, cars, radios, telephones, the rest of it, it's hopelessly out of date. It doesn't really work, but we're attached to it in very much the same way they are attached to the sacred cow in the Indian subcontinent, and most of us, and certainly people of my age, tend to have a little think about the national health in terms of Doctor in the House and those wonderful books, and James Robertson Justice as the surgeon, and matron, and dedicated and beautiful nurses and all that kind of thing from those lovely black and white movies that we watched some years ago. And that really stays in our minds, doesn't it? And that's a sort of emotional attachment we have, in the same way that we think about vets as James Herriot and that wonderful series All Creatures Great and Small. And of course anybody now like us who has a small holding or animals of any sort that know that veterinary science these days is more about whether your pet or your animals are insured and how much the fee is going to be. Those vocational days of yesteryear have largely gone, not with everybody, but in the main. And of course the national health system now is the third biggest institutional bureaucracy on the face of the planet, the biggest being, I think, the Chinese army, the second being the Indian subcontinent railway system, and the third is the national health, which employs over 1.2 million people, incidentally over half of whom have no medical qualifications whatsoever. Now, I know you need administrators and I know you need mechanics and so on and so forth, but I think the fact that the national health has over 600,000 people with no medical qualifications whatsoever, it's obviously now bureaucratically out of control. And of course, 14 months ago, we were told that we all had to sort of suffer under martial law, stay at home to save the national health, stop it being overwhelmed for a couple of weeks. We're still, of course, getting the same story 14 months on. And we used to go out on Thursday nights and clap our hands like performing seals. Well done, the NHS. And you can see the boards, the billboards all over the place at the moment, thank you NHS, but it isn't really like that, is it? It's been the biggest failure that we've seen in any British institutional system since the 2007 banking crisis. The NHS has failed, and I would argue that it's failed because it's trying to do something which is impossible. It's trying to deliver free at the point of delivery, free, something that's paid for by taxation. And there's no break on the demand for the service. There's no break at all. There's no cost. You don't have to pay for anything for an appointment. You can break your appointments. You can do whatever you like. Come one, come all. You can actually come to this country out of the blue and just line up at the National Health Service and be looked after, which was never the idea of the original National Health Service. It was the Beveridge Report in 1943, I think it was. It goes back then to have a service where you bought your stamp on a weekly basis, which entitled you to health service at the point of the delivery. You had actually paid because you'd bought a stamp. Now it's come one, come all, and nobody cares, and you can be a foreigner, you're not billed. There's millions of pounds worth of outstanding bills that foreigners just don't pay. They come here for treatment and they go away. So the whole system is frankly flawed. But politically, of course, it's suicide to criticise the NHS. For some reason in this country, it's suicide. And that's a shame, because it means it will never be reformed. And if you look at the cost for these 1.2 million people working for the NHS, it actually works out, if you divide it into the budget, you'll see that it's in the region of £2,300 per every man, woman and child in this country on an annual basis, which of course is unsustainable. You can't go on running a system that's so expensive because there's no break, and the problems with management and procurement are well known. And my friends in the National Health Service, who are many, who believe in the concept, think that the concept in its own right is perfect, it's just not run very well. But you can't run something very well which has absolutely no market discipline. The reason that your Morrison's, Tesco's or Sainsbury's delivers you goods efficiently and at a good price and a competitive price is because if you don't like Sainsbury's, you can go to Morrison's, and if you don't like Morrison's, you can go to Tesco's, so on and so forth. Now, it's Hobson's choice with the NHS, isn't it? It's Hobson's choice. You either have that hospital or you have that doctor, or that's it. There's no choice. So the service doesn't have to be particularly good or particularly efficient or particularly cost effective. Now, let me just say now, I was very blessed for 35 years with one of the best local GPs in the north of England. Vocational, man of a little bit younger than me, 10 years younger than me, Cambridge man, rugby playing man, an excellent GP, old school, and so is all his staff. So this has got nothing whatsoever to do with the treatment that I've personally had, which has been exemplary. Although I have to say I have been a private client up until probably 5 or 6 years ago. Everything I did, I paid for on a private basis, but that's neither here nor there. I have been registered with this practice for 35 years, and the GP is a personal friend. So it's nothing to do with the service I've got, I'm not going to a better service. I'm not, as I go private, I'm not going to get a better GP. I'm not going to get a better service. But what I'm going to get is confidentiality. Now, the problem that we have at the moment is that the National Health Service is simply another division of government. So there is no confidentiality of the practice or the treatment room or the consulting room, and call it whatever you like. And I happen to know that. Recently, in the last 6 months, I've had quite a few shocks, knowing that just how easily other government departments can get at my private records. And that's something I find rather disconcerting, especially when it is quite clear, in my view, that we are rapidly going down the path of mass medication in one way or another. Triggered by this so-called pandemic, if pandemic it be, which is of course another story which I've done many videos on. So if push comes to shove and medication becomes compulsory, and there's a tremendous drive for that, make no mistake, if you are with the National Health Service, the government will have access to your records and they can find you, and if it's compulsory, they can make it happen. So that is a very worrying thing, and there are parts of the world now where that is happening. In the so-called, of course, Western liberal democracies. Now, there's another thing here, that there is either no critical thinking allowed by medical staff, no critical thinking, or no critical thinking allowed or trained for, and a dissenting voice is silenced. So I get a very big postbag on this kind of thing, and if nurses want to say in A&E that they're very worried about whatever's coming through A&E as a result maybe of mass medication of some sort, they're not allowed to speak out. They will lose their job, and we've all seen the clips of people who have either been sacked, disciplined, so this is a very, very difficult problem. And of course, the national health system is very highly politicised, and we know that. So the BMA, for example, is a very politicised professional body, as is the Royal College of Nursing. We tend to think in old-fashioned ways of these matters, but they're not now. If you read their material and you look at the individuals that run them, you'll find that they have a very deep political view. And I made a video a little while ago on Public Health England, and I exposed Public Health England for being the shambles, the expensive shambles that it is. And of course, it was a few months later when the government admitted it was a shambles, and they've got rid of it. But of course, all they've done is they've rearranged it a bit. They've changed the name, but all the same people on the same salaries are there. So you're still getting the same. You're getting the same shambles. So, for example, your GP is not allowed to suggest to you that there could be side effects on mass medication, for example. You're supposed to give informed consent. Now, you can't have informed consent on some of these medical programs in 5 minutes, or perhaps a leaflet that you've only been given after the jab or whatever it happens to be has been given to you. So we are now finding, aren't we? And it's in the public domain if you know where to look. It's not, that doesn't mean mainstream media. You won't find this on the BBC or Sky or Channel 4 or anything like that. But if you want to dig down and make a little bit of an effort and find out, it's all there for you to see. And not just in this country, it's globally, about the side effects of various sorts of drugs. And I'm not just talking about the jab. But of course, pharmaceutical industry is multi-billion. It's huge. It's multi-billion. It buys whoever you like. It buys shares in the media. It buys people in the media. It buys politicians who, let's be frank, are quite easily bought. And not very bright, some of them too. So we have all these problems and you're not getting that. You're now, if you're still with the National Health, you are with an organisation which is part of deep state. It's part of the influence of the pharmaceutical companies. There is no dissent. So you will not be talked about vitamin supplements. You won't be talked about diet. You'll be given a drug, and I made this point before. If there's anything wrong with you, it's bam, bam, you're in for 5 minutes and you'll be given a drug. Wham, next please, ding. These are the problems with the National Health, and of course the confidentiality one is the most important. And a number of people have asked me to flesh this out a little bit. What do you do? Well, this is the sad thing, it's expensive. If you get out of the National Health system, it's really quite expensive. You have to then pay for your prescriptions, you have to pay for the issue of your prescriptions, and of course if you want to go and see your private GP for your half an hour consultation or 20-minute consultation, whatever it is, it's going to set you back probably about 80 quid or maybe even more, maybe 100 quid, and your telephone consultation will probably be 50 quid, so it isn't cheap. So as always, with these things, as always with things, if you want decent, if you want decent anything in life, you have to pay, and you get what you pay for. And again, as I say, that's not a reflection on some of the hard-working, dedicated professional staff in the front line. And of course, people think about the NHS. Oh, was that marvellous nurse that looked after my dying mother? She was absolutely wonderful. I won't hear a word against the National Health. But you see, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not having a pop at her or the doctors or the nurses. I'm having a pop at the system that can't deliver, and a system now which has been totally owned by the state. But I'm also getting a lot of people writing me to saying that, you know, that vocational nurse, that compassionate nurse or doctor is now not letting me be with my dying mother because I don't have a chit, or I haven't been cleared for some sort of COVID clearance or something like that. So it's become entirely bureaucratic, and the compassion, the common sense and the pragmatism is being steamed out by the state, as well as all the other issues which I've just talked about. So sadly, that's the situation, and people have asked me to post a video on it, and that's where I see the situation until perhaps we can get back control or get serious reform of our health service in this country, which looks at the moment further away than ever. So the money goes poured in, there's no caveats at all. Here's more money, have more taxpayers' money. And of course, it's not just tax, is it? At least 50% of the national health budget is paid for by debt. So we're actually borrowing money. We're borrowing money to keep the rickety thing on the road, and we're borrowing the money actually physically from the next generation, from our children and our grandchildren, which is not healthy. So we either reform, you can have a state health policy in France and Belgium, where I worked for some time. They have a national health policy. It's much more efficient because it doesn't try and do the impossible, which is giving everybody treatment without actually invoicing people for the treatment, and you can claim it back later. At the moment, the system simply doesn't work, and there's no oversight of procurement or management practices. So that's where we are. I think a lot of people know this deep in your heart, but as I say, it's an emotional thing, the National Health Service, and I think we have to shake off that emotion and get some realism into it. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based. And I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.